Howdy folks, Craig Levati here with the Houston Museum of Natural Science and the Beyond Bones Zoomcast. This week's episode, we are talking with the guys from SpaceCityWeather.com. That's right, Eric Berger and Matt Lanza are talking about all things hurricane season and telling us just what it's like to cover Houston and its amazing, wonderful, and scary weather world. Howdy, folks. Craig Levati here with the Houston Museum of Natural Science and the Beyond Bones Zoomcast. I am joined by my lovely and amazing, talented, learned co-host, Kat Havens.
Thank you. How are you? Coming to you from over the eye of the hurricane.
Eye of the hurricane. It's a pretty big hurricane there. First I thought it was the hurricane or the whatever it was from the day after tomorrow.
And then I told you I have no idea. It's a pretty hurricane. It's a nice one.
There you go. And I am currently located inside a 38-year-old single deadhead's living room.
Bachelor.
Like a baller. And today's the reason we have hurricanes, the reason we're talking about the weather is because we have two of the most learned weather gentlemen in the city of Houston, if not the state of Texas, if not the world. Eric Berger and Matt Lanza from SpaceCityWeather.com. Guys, how you doing?
Doing great, Craig and Kat. Nice to talk with you today.
Yeah, it's great. You guys, now this is your second time on the show.
Yep.
Yeah, we I think y'all were on last year right around the same time or so. I think we were about to have just another nasty storm ruckus thing going on. We had you guys on right before it. And as we're speaking to you guys now, it is Wednesday morning, and Houston last night went through a bit of a little weather pickle, if you want to call it that.
That's not really the preferred vernacular.
No.
Weather pickle. We usually use the word storm, okay. but feel free to introduce new jargon.
Now you're going to be able to use pickle in your writing. You're going to be like, oh, look at this horrible pickle coming. And then there's a pickle coming across the map there. So
Laddie with a side of meatballs.
Yes, and I know we were kind of worried too that things were going to get a lot worse. And apparently, as you guys know, it's not that bad today. So we definitely weathered the storm.
That's right. We did weather the storm. It actually looked really nasty last night. And we were quite concerned that the storms would kind of move toward the city of Houston and then really slow down. And so we would see these training thunderstorms and several hours of heavy rainfall, because these storms were producing very intense rainfall rates, in some cases 4 inches per hour or higher. And that's way more than you need to back up streets and bayous and really instigate serious flooding. The fortunate thing is that the storms were pretty progressive and that they kept moving through. And so they charged right through the Houston area. And so while you did see a period of brief, intense rainfall, lots of lightning, of course, hail, some reports of even tornadoes that sent people scurrying to their basements. I love that warning about going to your basements, because no one in Houston has a basement. But anyway, it was nasty, but it was a short-term nasty. And really the heaviest parts of the storms didn't hang around long enough to cause any serious flooding in the metro area.
Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
I was just going to say, if I can interject, if last night was a weather pickle, I guess what Eric's trying to say is it really wasn't that big of a deal.
Oh, wow.
Oh, shut it down.
That's a punch.
Matt, we're having some video buffering problems with your feed.
Yeah.
We're going to have to get you back on.
That was
hear you, Matt.
That was sick. That's like, you put that GIF in there of like the kid throwing the microphone down, just like.
Is that a dad joke, boom. Craig?
That is, yeah.
Okay, and he's a dad, so we'll accept that.
They're dads. They have all rights.
Make terrible jokes.
They have all rights and capabilities to do that. So, guys, we're talking to you on the precipice. I'm using a lot of $10 words today. On the precipice of another Houston Gulf Coast hurricane season, and we're glad you're here, obviously, and we're glad that we have you guys in Houston to guide us through one of these. On the outset, how are we looking? What are the forecasts looking like for 2021?
What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, so far, most of the preseasonal forecasts have been calling for an active hurricane season. Colorado State University, which is kind of considered historically that they were one of the first ones to really develop a seasonal forecast. So they kind of have the historical edge on this. They're calling for about 17 named storms and I believe 8 hurricanes this year, which is slightly above normal. Obviously not quite to last year's 30 named storms and 11 or whatever it was hurricanes. I don't know how many it was last year at this point, but still certainly expecting to be an active season. And the good news is that last summer we sort of had more like a La Nina cool water in the Pacific Ocean, which tended to drive a little bit more of an active hurricane season. That has now been declared over by NOAA. There's probably some residual effect, but I think it limits a little bit the ceiling of this season, at least in terms of activity. Now, it only takes one storm. Obviously, a season like 1983 only had 4 storms in total. One of them was Alicia. So, you have to kind of consider that when you're looking at these seasonal forecasts.
I have a question that is pertinent right now. I want to get it in there. Can we ever expect them to say it's not going to be a very active hurricane season this year? Like, I've never heard that. It's always, it's going to be an active one this year. And I'm like,
Yeah. Certainly in years when there's a strong El Nino predicted, you would get a below average forecast for activity. But we've been in an active period for about the last 30 years.
Okay.
Potentially due to climate change to some extent, but also because of this temperature oscillation in the Atlantic. That's kind of happens over decades.
Okay. Good answer.
So when I guess when we're coming up to obviously another hurricane season, we're still dealing with a lot of PTSD, and I think rightfully so, from Harvey. When you guys, when you talk to people on Twitter, when you talk to people, on social media or even in your personal lives, what are the questions that come up the most about hurricane season? What are people needing to know? What are they dying to know?
What everyone is dying to know is what it means for me. So, we've got an area that encompasses 7 or 8 counties, 7 or 8 million people, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of square miles. And so you have broad disparities in terms of the weather that people are going to see from a tropical storm. And so the challenge for us is to try to communicate what the region as a whole will see. But then people want that really granular information. And it's understandable, right? They're trying to make decisions about whether they should evacuate and things like that. And that's why what I think is really important is for people to do a little bit of research before hurricane season begins. Find out what evacuation zone you're in. And you can Google zip zones for Harris County or surrounding counties and find that information, find out how vulnerable you are to storm surge. You can do a little bit of research if you have a house, look in the attic and see if there are clips that are holding down the roof. And if so, then you're less vulnerable to wind damage because your roof probably isn't going to blow off if it's got hurricane clips. Find out, how vulnerable you are to inland flooding. And if you've had a home since Hurricane Harvey, that was a pretty good test, although certainly not fail-proof. Really, people need to understand their vulnerabilities to the 3 main threats from a hurricane: storm surge, wind, and inland rainfall. And then when the storm threatens, understand under which conditions you would actually evacuate. So figure out your vulnerabilities, know under what circumstances you're going to evacuate, and then have a plan. Like, if we're going to evacuate, we would go to grandma's house, in Nederland, Texas. Or Craig, you probably would certainly go to Austin. You seem like an Austin kind of guy.
Dallas all the way.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, but just so know your vulnerabilities, understand when you would evacuate, under what circumstances, and then have a plan for what you would do in terms of where you would go, what you would take with you, how you would take care of your pets, and that sort of thing. That's the basic advice.
Matt, what do you have to throw into there?
Yeah, I think it's important for people to recognize that no 2 storms are alike. And just because you had a certain outcome in your backyard, say during Hurricane Ike, that doesn't mean that you're going to have the same outcome, even with a storm that's of the same intensity as Ike when it were to come ashore. You have to understand that everything is every storm is unique. Every past flood is just that, a past flood. It's not the next flood. And, if there's forecast to be rainfall and you didn't flood during Harvey or Allison or tax day or whatever, just understand that may not mean that you're not going to flood during, this next storm. And that's one thing I think that people sometimes struggle with, especially people that are new here. When we moved into our neighborhood, we met one of our neighbors, and literally the first thing they said to us when they introduced themselves is, this neighborhood didn't flood during Allison. This was, 5 or 6 years ago. And I was like, all right, that's great. Good to know. This doesn't mean it's not going to flood during the next storm. Thankfully, it didn't flood during Harvey either. But, it's just sort of that kind of idea I think is pretty important. And I agree with Eric on educating yourself and kind of understanding what your risks are, and know where you live in the area, know which watershed you're in. The Harris County Flood Control website has a tool that lets you see where all the different bayou watersheds are, so you know which bayou you have to watch if you live in a flood prone part of that watershed. Whenever it rains, it takes a little bit of the anxiety off of things, and allows you to kind of focus on just focusing on that one particular location.
Now, I know, one of the reasons that people enjoy your website, Space City Weather, and all that stuff, and the way you speak to everybody on Twitter and social media, is because you guys are you're a little bit more uninhibited, where you don't need to, you're not promoting something as much as you're the lack of a better term, a lot of people love you guys because you're not sensationalistic. Nope. What are some of the buzzwords that we can tell our listeners to sort of try to tune out when they're seeing, if dear God, if they actually want to go see what another, outlet is doing besides you guys, what are some of the sensationalistic tropes that you see a lot that you could tell people, hey, ignore that, or, oh, maybe pay attention to that? What are some things out there you guys see a lot?
So I would say a couple of things to that. First of all, you talked about how we were kind of uninhibited, and I would say we're really unfiltered, because we don't have any corporate owners. Like Matt and I own the site, so we can do whatever the hell we want, right? We can say what we want, we can post when we want, and literally there's nothing. It's pretty freeing after working at a place like the Houston Chronicle. It certainly did not inhibit me, but I had to answer to someone. In this case, we don't answer to anyone but ourselves. So we can be as real as we want to be. And we don't have an advertiser-driven model, so we don't have to sensationalize or really, chase clicks or our eyeballs. So that helps us with the no hype. In terms of being careful for smart consumers of weather information, I would say in general, the local TV stations do a pretty good job. I would not characterize any of the local forecasters as being sensationalistic. They're generally pretty good. I would say, though, that, in their business, they are chasing eyeballs. And if a producer puts the meteorology segment at the beginning of the newscast, they're expecting that to be pretty sexy. Or have, if it bleeds, it leads, that kind of thing. You need to, and so if it's raining in one part of town really heavy, but the rest of the town is seeing sprinkles, they'll go to the part of town that's flooding and sort of imply that that's, going on everywhere. And so that's kind of the pressures of television. I think in general, though, TV does a reasonably good job. But the biggest area where you've really got to watch what you consume, I think, is social media, because we see it all the time during hurricane season. The kinds of posts that get shared the most are the most sensationalistic, and oftentimes are not based in fact. And so that's basically like the bond we make with our readers, is that if you come to us, we will tell you everything we know, right? Including the things that we think may happen. But, if we're not out there screaming about the potential for a Category 4 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico 7 days from now, then that's probably not a realistic possibility. But you do see those kinds of posts on Facebook and other social media sites all the time.
Yeah, I don't even go to anybody else anymore. You're my go-to page always when there's a weather event, and we will sit there because you promise another update, and I will refresh and refresh and refresh when we're really nervous until it comes. So you guys really do provide something that's very valuable. And I do think it is because you're a model where there's no, you don't, read us, don't read us. We're here giving the weather. And we appreciate that, honestly.
So we're trying to help with that too. So you don't have to refresh. We've got an app under development. It's almost done. But it's not quite finished yet. Yeah, it looks like this. And so you probably can't see.
Yeah.
One alert at the top. And anyway, you will be able to get a notification every time there's a date. So.
How are we going to find out about that app and when it's available? You can tell who's excited.
I would imagine we'll put it on the website, but it's hopefully. I was hoping to have it done by June 1st. We may still make that deadline, but it's close. So,
is that the one you guys are working on with Dwight Silverman? Dwight's involved somehow.
Yeah, and building an app is like pretty difficult. It's not cheap, and there's actually a lot that goes into it, more than I certainly realized. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's coming along nicely, and it's going to be, it's like our website, pretty simple, straightforward, but powerful to use.
Awesome.
And you got a good pedigree there too with Dwight. We were both, former cohorts of Dwight's, so we know that he's a straight shooter. I was asking you guys before we pushed go on this thing. I've always wanted to see what Space City Weather's like HQ look like, because I was telling you guys that I imagined that your offices, your home bases look like Lucius Fox's set up from Dark Knight, where he's just he gives the keys to Batman so he can lurk and see what's going on in Gotham. But apparently Matt is away from that little thing, so we're not going to get the really cool view of like the 7 different. What does the HQ look like? Because I imagine you guys are having like 20 screens in front of you, right?
I'm happy to give you a tour of my home office. It's not a whole lot to look at, but
you have a rainbow on your wall because Matt does.
I don't have a rainbow. I've got my Soviet Union poster. Just 2 screens, Craig.
Oh, okay.
Cold War memorabilia. I approve.
And then books, TV, and.
I give you a 9 out of 10 room rating. Very good.
Okay, well that's good. I give it a 10 out of 10 because it's a pretty nice home office for me.
I never give a 10 out of 10.
I just would have thought you would have had multiple panels that you would just like it was like you put on the goggles.
Like we get emails and stuff from people like students or people interested in becoming meteorologists. They want to come by and look at where we work, and it's like the answer to them is always like, look, I'm in a pretty boring home office, literally working on a computer with an internet connection, and so it's mostly the communication part and not for us the technology part.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to say that, but that also shows that it's citizen journalism that anybody. And I'm not saying anybody could do this, but that is the fun part, is that there's no pretense to it, and it's just you guys.
I mean, I studied citizen journalism 25 years ago in graduate school, so I understand this. I would say it's not so much citizen journalism. I would say it's more like public service journalism, because I've been a journalist for 2 decades, and Matt has been a meteorologist for almost as long, and we're both professionals at what we're doing. And the reason I think we're successful is that we've been doing it long enough. I've been writing about the weather online since Hurricane Katrina. That was 16 years ago. And so I think it's kind of, we have the experience and we know the market. So I wouldn't say it's citizen journalism. I would say it's more like public service journalism. That's what people see us. They don't see us as a media site, which is funny because Matt used to work in TV, broadcast TV. I've literally been a reporter for my entire career. So we are like a media site, but people don't see us as a media site because, again, we're not advertising, we're not chasing clicks or anything. We're just sort of literally, as Kat said, putting out what we know
plain speak, man, and you don't get that anywhere else.
And like there's no like nonsense or like effort to sort of juice it up.
I agree.
Yeah, that I think that does. There's a love to it and a love of your fellow Houstonian as well that speaks to that as well. That you're looking after us. I
think that's right. And it's interesting. I've been in Houston for almost 25 years. It's been a wonderful city for me, and to have a family and grow up. And I think Matt can talk about this the same way. He comes from the Northeast, and how long have you been in Houston, Matt? About a decade. But I mean, he's really
just about 10 years.
Yeah. Where are you originally from, Matt?
So I'm originally from New Jersey, southern New Jersey, okay. The quieter part of the state. So yeah, I mean, Houston's great. It's a place where, I honestly like to say that, like, when we go away on vacation or something, we'll go out to eat somewhere or something like that. We're just kind of like, yeah, this is all right, but the food in Houston is great. Or, the city's okay, but Houston's it's just a good place to, when you come home, you're coming home. And I think it's not really, a lot of people don't understand that about Houston that aren't from here. They don't get what a good place it is to live in. And I think some of this talk about, being good to the community and everything, this is something that I now talk to students about, whenever they ask questions and things like that, is that, a forecast alone, that's why we exist, right? We exist to give information, provide information to people. But at the same time, I feel like we've done a pretty good job, particularly since Harvey, of empathizing with people. And there's not a lot of that necessarily in media in general. So I think we kind of do a pretty good job of that. And I think it's really critical and important, especially in a place like Houston that has just been, hammered by significant events for the last 5, 6, 7 years, that we can empathize and relate to people and understand what they're going through. We know you're nervous about this storm, so we want to tell you what we know is going to happen, and we want to tell you when it's going to get better. Just things like that. People seem to gravitate towards some kind of hope, and if we can provide a little bit of that in addition to, forecast information, I think we've done a very good job.
You just described perfectly exactly the experience, at least from my perspective. Like, it's like your brother or your friend or somebody who's telling you because they care about you and they want you to know the best information, and it feels very genuine. So I would definitely agree.
Yeah. And it's, you feel it. Like I will sit there and I'll be writing on a post, as I'm writing it out, I can feel just the tension, of people just being in the angst. Yeah. Everything, especially since Harvey, like I get it. I understand. I've tried to understand it a little bit better, because I know that this is not it's going to be better in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. This is going to last some people the rest of their lives. And other people are going to, change what they do because of what they went through during Harvey and other floods. So, it's important. And, you don't have everybody in Houston looking at you, but you feel the weight of that and you just want to do a good job.
I will say this, that go ahead. Sorry, Kat.
No, I just said, well, you do. I just wanted to give him some affirmation, and these guys both some affirmation, because they deserve it. And what they're doing is important. And I think what they're doing, like with the empathy and all of that is something that people need post Harvey. We're all kind of traumatized, even if we don't realize it sometimes. So that's all.
I was going to say too, that there's nothing that brings the city together quite like weather. We're all kind of exist on our own little islands, and we learned this earlier this year with the freeze. We learned it with Harvey. We've learned it with every single little, we have cute names for all these little flood events that we have: Tax Day flood, Memorial Day flood, everything like that. These things bring us together, and they're sort of like, if we don't quite all share the same, bank account or the same living situation, we all have to deal with the weather together. And you guys are really good about that, of sort of, it's a communal public service. And I'm thank you for hitting the nail on the head the way you did that way. Public service is the best word for it.
Yeah.
And that's very much needed. I guess one thing, I don't know if I've ever, I guess since it was like right in front of me at the time, I just didn't think about it. Before you guys started the site, did you look at the market and go, okay, there is a market for this? A market, obviously, I know is there a niche, rather? Let's use a science word. Is there a niche? Did you guys see a niche in the market using that word again. Did you see a niche that needed to be filled by Space City weather?
So first of all, neither Matt or I are remotely close to being like a business person. Like I don't have any business background. I'm not good at it, to be honest. But, I had been blogging and writing about weather at the Chronicle, as I say, since 2005. So when I left in 2015, there was an audience for that. And I wasn't sure whether it would carry over. But I just decided to sort of start my own site as a literal hobby. And Matt had been working with me at the Chronicle site. He joined, he signed up right away. And so we started it literally the night I left, because there were some storms that weekend. And it really was a hobby, not a business, until Harvey happened, which really, put a spotlight on the site. And it's grown quite a bit even since then. I had always felt like, I remember going, Craig, and having meetings with Nancy Barnes and other editors at the Chronicle saying, I mean, you think even going back to Jeff Cohen, by the way, who was gracious, and they paid for my meteorology education. The Chronicle did, but basically saying that, look, obviously there's the newspaper, right, which is print, and so the product is old, and so you can't compete on a level footing with television, which is immediate. Then there's the TV market, which absolutely dominates weather coverage. And I said, but then there's online, and no one is really focusing on online for the Houston area. So I was like, I think I should try to be Houston's foremost digital meteorologist, right? Because the TV guys are doing stuff online, but their primary focus is TV. But no one was focused primarily online. And so with online meteorology, you could sort of both be immediate like TV, but also be much more expansive, and really communicate, I think, better, because you can think about what you're saying, include forecast maps, and sort of people aren't trying to catch it or miss it, because of the commercial break or whatever. It's just kind of all there. Everyone can go see it when they need it. And I thought it was sort of the perfect medium to convey kind of immediate information about the weather. And so I had some success with that at the Chronicle, but Space City Weather has just been a whole other step, because it's really, as I say, it's allowed Matt and I to express ourselves and sort of, really fully embrace this medium as being internet only.
Yeah, because I remember you had like a blogging, I guess the Blogging Outpost, that you would write about stuff like that. And it makes sense that, to your point, that there would need to be, just as, there would need to be like a vertical just for weather. Like we have sports, but we need to also have like if somebody could write about the weather the way we write about sports. Yeah, it seems like a no-brainer.
I pushed them pretty hard to create that. Like I said, let's create like a Houston weather site, right? That would feature both a great radar and 7-day forecast and a lot of the stuff you found on other weather sites. But then, we would have like the personal touch, right? Mm-hmm. Human tended forecasts and like sort of, and they sort of did a blog, but they never went all the way. And so, being able to do that with Space City Weather was pretty rewarding.
And y'all's is so user friendly. I will say that too. Like I would get very frustrated, and I still do, and I just don't even bother anymore. If you'd go to Click2's weather site, or I don't mean to call anybody in particular out because they're all the same. I can't make the radar work. I can't figure out what's like the latest or to sort the information. And that had always been a problem. I'm not particularly talented at computers, but I'm also not, an idiot. But y'all are clear. Here it is. It's very easy to follow, and that's what I find, I think, the most useful for sure.
Yeah, we try to keep it simple, and with the simple design and structure, it also makes sure that it is always loads fast. So it's
and I just want to know what the deal is. I don't care about fancy, swirly, graphics and things. Like, just give me the information, please. And y'all do an excellent job of that. Without it.
I know especially on Twitter, Matt's really good at just conveying some of the information to people in simple, plain terms that it's definitely retweetable, because I do it a lot from the museum, but it's definitely, it's when I started running the museum's Twitter account, like I started thinking about the hierarchy of needs for the Houston Twitter user. And I realized that obviously weather is right up there because it affects everything about our life and also traffic. But I don't retweet a lot of traffic stories, obviously, because, that's kind of, but weather is one thing that as a science museum, we're basically surrounded by this force, this natural force, and we're all experiencing it. Guys, that's to me, that's like we are living in like a classroom. It's like this, the Gulf Coast is a weather museum, a weather classroom, if you will, of just all these different things happening. Would y'all agree with that?
I certainly would. One of the things that's funny, every now and then you have one of these significant floods, you sort of have a moment or two where you're just like, is it worth it? Is it worth it to stay in a place where this happens so often? And, I'll freely admit to having thoughts like that sometimes, where it gets like a little bit challenging and you get a little stressed out and you get a little tired, and it can be exhausting sometimes. But then I sort of come to myself and say, look, we're kind of living in a place that's, in my opinion, besides maybe California, at least in the US, sort of at the front lines of whatever the climate future is, and dealing with problems resulting from climate change, from more extreme weather, things like that. Houston is living that now, and we are at the front of that situation. And then I tell myself, why, if you're a meteorologist and you're a forecaster and you're a communicator, where else would you want to work? There's very few places that you could think about other than in this area or somewhere on the Gulf Coast, because the weather is so impactful and interesting and frustrating, and you get everything, and it makes for a very educational experience as a meteorologist.
Yeah, there's a lot of subjects to cull from. And I mean, we didn't want to bring up the freeze too much, but that was one of those things where the freeze brought in this other element. We're like, oh, we didn't know it could do that here. It was like, oh, that's okay. Surprise. Yeah, surprise. It could also, snow as well. But going back to the climate change thing, and what do you think we're in for Houston wise over the next 100 years? I mean, what do you anticipate, or what should we be scared of?
I would say that we're in for more of the same. The summers are getting longer. I think since I've lived in Houston, the period that you could define as summer, some arbitrary temperature, but basically, the average temperature has been above a certain level. It's on average for about a week longer now than it was 20 years ago. And that trend is continuing. And I think, unfortunately, the intense rainfall events that we've seen are the kinds of things we can expect in the future. And so while on a global scale, we need to address climate change, on a local and statewide scale, we really need to think very smartly about how we deal with flooding.
Infrastructure
development, mitigating that, and do that in a smart, comprehensive way. Otherwise, we're just going to see these repeated events. Mm-hmm. It's not like they're going to become fewer and further between. They're probably going to stay the same or get worse.
Matt, would you say the same thing?
Yep, 100%. And I think that there's sort of this mindset sometimes that it's like, it's bad luck. We got hit by a storm. And I think people kind of just tell themselves that to sort of cope with it. Like, oh, we've always had flooding, which we have. If Houston's always flooded, it's flooded since day one. But there's a lot more people here now. And the flooding is different now than it was, 50, 100 years ago. And, that's because of a little bit more rainfall that you get with each storm, as the climate warms a little bit. And it's also because of the development patterns in the city, and things like that. And so we need to have 21st century thinking for these problems. And I think that sometimes we're relying on a skeleton or a foundation that's rooted in the 20th century to make these decisions in the 21st century. And, I don't know what the answers are. That's not my job to come up with that, but I just know that we need to have that kind of mindset and that kind of thinking, and we need to actually act on it instead of talking about it for 10, 12 years. Hello, Ike Dyke, before actually doing anything about it. So things like that are important. I think one other thing to think about, it's not just not just flooding rains, it's also drought. Like we've been kind of fortunate, that we haven't had a significant severe drought since, what was it, 2011.
Yeah.
And, we can get some real nasty drought conditions here, and those may be exacerbated as the climate warms as well. So, those are things to think about.
Yeah, I definitely remember that summer with the drought. I remember doing a story around there for the Houston Press where we tried to boil an egg on the sidewalk. It was a stupid
Tried to
thing.
Fry an egg on the sidewalk.
Yeah, fried an egg. Yeah, it was just, it exists on YouTube somewhere. It's horrible.
I think I've seen it.
Yeah. It's just, the weather thing here. Like I was always thinking about how growing up to Eric's point, I have noticed that the weather has changed even like since I was a child in the late 80s. Things have just gotten a lot more dramatic.
Yep.
Yeah, Kat, I mean, you've been here.
I've been here my whole life.
Yeah. So you've seen a lot of changes as well.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about that actually last night because of the weather. I was like, man, I mean, I remember flooding and there'd be the little flash flooding of the roads for just a hot minute and it would drain off. And I remember when the bayou would come into the street, and my parents lived in the same house for 50 years, no flooding, no nothing, until Harvey. It's definitely gotten more intense. It's definitely changed, but it's development. Like these guys were saying, you can only put so many houses on green spaces before you run out of places for water, water to go, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a big part of the problem too.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up here, guys, when was the last time you were at the museum?
Put them on the spot.
I was there when my parents were in town about a month ago. First time in a while. It was great.
I saw that. Yeah. Thank you for having that. What was y'all's favorite thing?
Oh, dinosaurs.
Hell
Kidding
yeah.
me? My 2.5-year-old was all over, literally just like running from skeleton to skeleton. Like, look at this, look at this, look at this.
Oh, that's cool. Cool. Eric, it's been a while since you've been over there, huh?
It was pre-COVID for me. Yeah.
Okay. Well, come on back. We're
butterflies.
I have a personal question because I have these men trapped here. My daughter's graduating on Saturday and it's supposed to be outside. What are the chances that's going to happen? Not good, right?
What do you think, Matt?
Going to be close. It's going to be a tightrope. Sunday looks better than Saturday right now.
That's our makeup day, so hopefully one of them happens.
One of them should happen.
Like, let's just throw in some raincoats. We're not going to melt.
Well, it's like I was saying on Twitter a few weeks ago. If you want good weather, you got to put in the request on the website to these guys pretty early so they can send it up the chain. Otherwise, you're
fair enough. I failed to send a formal request.
There you go.
The ceremony is going to be delayed. Or virtual.
Or you can start, maybe Venmoing, some cash under the table there. Make it work. All right. Matt, Eric. Oh, Eric, I forgot to talk about really quick. Congratulations on the book. It is Liftoff, Elon Musk and the Desperate Early Days That Launched SpaceX. I see the book right behind me, right behind you right there. Looks really cool. So you and Elon are homies?
We're homies, yeah. You bet.
Can we see the cover, or is that?
Yeah, I would see it all.
What's that?
Can we see the cover of your book, or is it a secret?
Yeah, this is a picture of the first launch.
That's cool.
2006.
That's
And
cool.
It's a hell of a story. It's about the first 6 years of the company and how they almost failed, and all the people who worked with Elon to ultimately make a success. Yeah, he's doing very interesting things in Texas. We should do a podcast about that sometime.
Yeah.
The place near my house in the old Borders or whatever bookstore it was is, I think, going to be his place or one of his Gessner and Westheimer.
Oh, I was speaking more for rockets and rockets.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, I got
is really remarkable.
He is.
It's unprecedented. So but anyway, this goes back and tells the story of the start of the company and sort of how they laid the foundations for the disruption of the space industry now that we're seeing today. So
awesome.
And I will say, as a avid reader of nonfiction, wow. I read a lot of nonfiction. I've read Eric's book and it's excellent. It's a really, really good story. And it's, something I knew nothing about. So it was really interesting for me to kind of go through and understand that chapter of things, and strongly recommend it.
We probably already said this, but is it already available, Eric?
Yeah, it was published a couple months ago.
Okay, so Amazon.
Anywhere. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Cool. Yeah, we'll put a link on there too, and we'll make sure that producer Johnny gets that out there too, as well. And like I said, guys, Eric, Matt, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy days and talking to us about the weather.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you guys for all the work you do.
Thanks for having us.
Later, guys.